In 1957, a small car company in Kenosha, Wisconsin, nearly invented electronic fuel injection before Cadillac, before anybody. They built a 327 cubic inch V8 that could embarrass anything on the road. The problem was, they could barely afford to keep the lights on. This is the story of American Motors Corporation, the company that built some of the best V8s Detroit never respected and went broke doing it. To understand AMC, you have to understand what happened to the American car business after the Second World War. There were dozens of independent car companies before the war: Nash, Hudson, Packard, Studebaker, Kaiser-Frazer, Willys Overland. They all built cars, good cars, some of them. But in the early 1950s, General Motors and Ford got into a price war so vicious it nearly destroyed everyone else in the industry. The independents were bleeding cash. Margins evaporated overnight. Dealers couldn't compete on price. Customers couldn't ignore the gap between what the Big Three offered and what a small company could deliver for the same money. The message from Detroit was loud and unmistakable: get big or get dead. George Mason, who ran Nash Kelvinator Corporation, saw this coming before most of his contemporaries. His plan was ambitious and very specific: merge Nash, Hudson, Studebaker, and Packard into a single company large enough to fight the Big Three on equal footing, share engineering costs, share purchasing power, share dealer networks, consolidate factories. On May 1, 1954, Nash and Hudson merged to form American Motors Corporation. At the time, it was the largest corporate merger in American history, worth roughly $198 million. The grand idea was that Studebaker and Packard would join next, creating a genuine fourth force in the American automobile industry. 4 brands, shared platforms, enough combined volume to negotiate with suppliers and spread tooling costs across hundreds of thousands of units. They didn't join. Studebaker-Packard went their own way, and that alliance crumbled within a few years. Studebaker eventually fled to Canada and died there in '66. Packard was gone even sooner. So AMC was on its own, a mid-size fish in a pond with 3 sharks. The 4-company supermerger that Mason designed to change everything produced exactly one surviving entity, and it was half the size he had envisioned. For the first 4 years of AMC's existence, the company didn't turn a profit. Losses ranged from $12 million to almost $29 million per year. Executives publicly acknowledged that the company might not survive if those losses continued. Mason died just 5 months after the merger. His replacement was George Romney. Yes, that George Romney, Mitt's father, a devout Mormon who reportedly considered his company's engineering breakthroughs gifts from God. Romney was a sharp operator with a clear vision. He looked at the competition, looked at his budget, and made a decision that contradicted everything the American car industry believed at the time. AMC wasn't going to beat GM by building bigger cars. They were going to build smaller, smarter, more efficient ones. The Rambler became the weapon: compact, reliable, affordable. A Rambler won the 1959 Mobile Economy Run, and by 1960, Rambler was the 3rd most popular car brand in America, behind Ford and Chevrolet, ahead of Plymouth, Dodge, Buick, Pontiac, and everything else. AMC's financial turnaround was so dramatic that it became one of the most impressive corporate comebacks in American business history. The company was profitable enough by '61 to offer a profit-sharing plan to the United Auto Workers, a first in the automobile industry. But there was a problem lurking under all this success. AMC didn't have a V8 of its own. They had been buying Packard V8s for the 55 and 56 model years. Packard 320 and 352 cubic inch engines bolted into Nash Ambassadors and Hudson Hornets, paired exclusively with Packard Ultramatic automatic transmissions. The arrangement was expensive, limiting, and awkward. AMC was paying premium prices for engines it couldn't modify, couldn't improve, and couldn't manufacture in its own plant. When Packard sent AMC some parts bids, they were rejected as too expensive. Romney wanted out of the relationship entirely. He needed an in-house V8 engine, and he needed it fast. Here's where the story takes a turn. One of AMC's new engineering hires was a man named David Potter. Potter had just come from Kaiser-Frazer, where he had spent years developing a V8 engine that never reached production. Kaiser went under before the engine could be manufactured, but the research was done. The calculations, the prototyping work, the testing data. It all existed in Potter's head and his files, and now the man who had done all of that work was sitting in an AMC engineering office in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Romney's team took that Kaiser research and ran with it. They designed, developed, tested, and put a brand new V8 into mass production in less than 18 months. That timeline is extraordinary by any standard in the auto industry. Most engine programs take 3 to 5 years. AMC did it in a year and a half because they had no choice, no financial cushion, and no time to waste. The result was a 250 cubic inch overhead valve V8 that debuted in 1956 in the Nash Ambassador and Hudson Hornet special models. It weighed about 601 pounds officially. For reference, a comparable Studebaker 289 V8 weighed 675. The Chevrolet small block, which had debuted the year before and was already changing the industry, weighed 575. AMC's engine was heavier than the Chevy, but competitive with most everything else on the market. More importantly, it was completely theirs. No licensing fees. No supply chain dependency, no calling Packard to beg for parts. The design reflected good fundamentals: deep skirt block for structural rigidity, forged crankshaft, and connecting rods across every displacement. A 3¼ inch stroke shared by the entire first-generation family. By 1957, they bored it out to 327 cubic inches with a 4-inch bore. And then AMC did something nobody in the industry expected. They offered it with electronic fuel injection. The system was called Electrojector. Developed by Bendix Corporation, AMC published the price bulletin in March of '57, offering the EFI option on the Rambler Rebel for $395. This was supposed to be the first commercially available electronic fuel injection system on a production automobile in history, before Chrysler's similar Bendix system on the 300D and DeSoto Adventurer. Before anyone, anywhere, it didn't work. The electronics were temperamental. Transistors of that era couldn't reliably handle the heat and vibration under the hood of a running automobile. The supplier couldn't deliver functional units in any real volume. Perhaps 6 engineering and press cars were actually assembled with the system, possibly fewer. The technology was genuinely 20 years ahead of the manufacturing capability needed to support it in a consumer product. AMC quietly shelved the entire program. Chrysler had identical problems with their own electrojector units on the DeSoto that same year. Nobody in the entire American automobile industry could make it work reliably. Electronic fuel injection wouldn't become standard on American production cars until the mid-1980s. AMC almost cracked it in '57. Almost counts for nothing in the car business. The Rambler Rebel itself deserved better than history gave it. That 327 with a 4-barrel carburetor and high compression dropped into a lightweight Rambler body created a genuine factory hot rod years before anyone was using the term muscle car. One of the fastest production sedans in America that year. But AMC built only a limited run, and the company's entire marketing apparatus was aimed at selling economy cars to practical, budget-conscious buyers. Performance was a side project, a luxury they couldn't always afford. And that phrase describes AMC's entire relationship with its V8 engines for the next 3 decades. In '62, Romney left for Michigan politics, won the governorship. His replacement was Roy Abernethy, the successful sales executive who had built AMC's dealer network. Abernethy wanted bigger, more profitable cars, ambassador-class models that could compete directly with Ford Galaxies and Chevrolet Impalas. The problem was straightforward and devastating. Bigger cars required completely new tooling. Retooling for the '67 models alone cost $60 million, and the new designs shared fewer parts than before, making each unit more expensive to build. For General Motors, $60 million was a rounding error in a multi-billion-dollar operation. For AMC, it was a bet-the-company gamble with money they could barely scrape together. Sales fell. AMC reported a $4.2 million loss in '66 on total sales of $479 million. In '67, losses more than tripled to $12.6 million. The annual report that year arrived in a plain, brown wrapper instead of the previous year's glossy cover. Investors understood the message. Abernethy resigned. New leadership cut costs, slashed prices, and started looking for excitement, youth appeal, something that would bring a 25-year-old into an AMC showroom. Enter Dick Teague, AMC's vice president of styling, who would hold that position for 21 years, the longest tenure of any design chief in Detroit history. Teague had worked at GM on the legendary '50 Oldsmobile Rocket, moved to Packard, did time at Chrysler, and landed at AMC, where he would stay for 26 years total. The man lost his right eye in a car accident at age 6, back when he was a child actor in silent films. He designed aircraft during the Second World War, studied at the Art Center School in Los Angeles, owned somewhere between 400 and 500 cars in his lifetime. At retirement, his personal collection included 2 of only 5 AMX3 concept cars, hand-built in Italy. When AMC needed someone to design them out of a corporate crisis, Teague was the answer. His Project 4 concept cars from the '66 auto show circuit provided the blueprint. 2 prototypes caught the public's imagination: a 2-seat sports car called the AMX, a 4-seat version called the AMX2. Robert Beverly Evans, an investor who had bought into AMC believing the company was undervalued, pushed hard for these concepts to reach production. Evans wanted racing credibility and youth appeal. These concepts became AMC's answer to the Ford Mustang. The Javelin debuted in August of '67 for the '68 model year. Starting price, $2,743. Teague had the budget for exactly one body style. Ford could offer fastback and notchback Mustangs. Plymouth had multiple Barracuda configurations. A MC got one shot, a semi-fastback 2-door hardtop. Teague described his design philosophy as the wet T-shirt look, tight skin over the mechanical structure, curves revealing everything underneath. Management insisted on trunk space and rear seat room. Teague delivered both and still made it look like a proper sports car. Motor Trend put the Javelin at the top of the sports personal category in its Car of the Year issue, calling it the most significant achievement for an all-new car that year. 56,400 Javelins sold in its first year. Not Mustang numbers. Ford was moving hundreds of thousands, but for AMC, it was a genuine hit. The 2-seat AMX followed 6 months later, built on a platform shortened by 12 inches to a 97-inch wheelbase, 1 inch shorter than a Corvette, priced about $2,000 less. Only about 19,000 2-seat AMXs were built over 3 years of production. AMC sent near-stock AMXs to the Bonneville Salt Flats in '68 and set over 100 national and international speed and endurance records, including sustained high-speed averages exceeding 189 miles per hour. The little company from Kenosha could go fast when it wanted to. Now, the engines. This is where AMC's engineering talent truly shined. By '64, The original Rambler Fight 8 was an aging design. Every competitor had invested in new engine architectures. Racing programs in the late 50s had taught GM, Ford, and Chrysler about volumetric efficiency, cylinder head flow, and lightweight casting techniques. Their new engines were lighter, more powerful, and cheaper to produce. AMC responded in '66 with what enthusiasts now call the Gen 2 engine, a 290 cubic inch V8, using thin wall casting that cut block weight by roughly 120 pounds compared to the original design. Down from about 660 to around 540, the engine was compact, modern, and well-proportioned, lighter than a Chrysler 273, nearly matching a Ford 289 on the scales. AMC engineers told the press it could expand to nearly 400 cubic inches on the same basic block. They were not bluffing. In '67, the 290 grew to 343 with a 4.080-inch bore. The four-barrel version made 280 horsepower. Now AMC rated their engines with all accessories attached and running. Ford and GM used more generous testing methods. The same AMC engine rated by Big Three standards would have been well over 300 horsepower. When that engine went into the Rogue and Rebel, cars that were easily 500 pounds lighter than their competing muscle cars, AMC had something real on its hands. '68 brought the 390, bore increased to 4.165 inches. Stroke lengthened to 3.574. Here's the remarkable part. Adding 100 cubic inches changed nothing about the block's external dimensions. Same mounting points, same bell housing bolt pattern, same physical footprint in the engine bay. You could pull a 290 and drop in a 390 without modifying anything around it. That kind of dimensional discipline doesn't happen by accident. It happens when your engineers know they'll never get funding for a new block, so the current one has to do everything. The 390 in the AMX produced 325 horsepower and 420 pound-feet. In the Rebel machine, with a different intake manifold and revised tuning, it hit 340 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. The machine came in red, white, and blue with a functional ram air hood scoop, a patriotic hammer that undercut most of its competition on the sticker price while matching them on the drag strip. AMC built about 2,130 Rebel machines in total. For the homologation process required by Trans Am racing rules, AMC produced about 2,500 Mark Donohue Signature Edition Javelins in '70, featuring a rear spoiler designed by Donohue himself. AMC actually lost money on many of these special editions. The conversions cost more than the markup could cover. The company spent money it didn't have to build a racing reputation it desperately needed. Quick note: if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. We do deep dives like this every week. All right, back to the engines. In '70, AMC raised the deck height on the entire engine family, creating what's considered the third generation. The 290 became the 304. The 343 became the 360. New cylinder heads with dogleg exhaust ports flowed 20% better than the previous rectangular port design on the exhaust side, which was where the old heads had been most restrictive. In '71, the 390 was stroked further to create the 401, 4.165-inch bore, 3.68-inch stroke, forged steel crankshaft, and connecting rods. 401 cubic inches from the same basic block architecture as the 290 that debuted 5 years earlier. 330 gross horsepower at 10.2 to 1 compression. Every single 401 left the factory with a 4-barrel carburetor. There was never a 2-barrel version offered, not once in the engine's entire production run from '71 through '78. Here's the detail that gets overlooked. That 330 rating was higher than a standard Pontiac 455 and higher than the Chevrolet 454 that powered the Corvette that year. AMC was extracting more power per cubic inch then engines 50 cubic inches larger, designed by companies with 10 times the engineering budget. A 3,200-pound Javelin AMX with the 401 ran the quarter mile in the mid-14-second range on low-lead, low-octane pump gasoline. Meanwhile, on the track, Roger Penske and Mark Donohue were proving the same point with checkered flags. In '70, Penske shocked the racing world by abandoning his championship-winning Camaros to campaign AMC Javelins in the Trans Am Series. Donohue was a Brown University mechanical engineering graduate they called Captain Nice. Quiet, methodical, brilliant behind the wheel and underneath the car. His teammate Peter Revson would later win Grand Prix races in Formula One. Penske built the Javelins from scratch in his Pennsylvania shop. One particularly creative modification involved fitting Porsche 917 disc brakes to the cars and stamping them with AMC part numbers. The rulebook required production-based manufacturer components. AMC part numbers on Porsche brakes satisfied the letter of the law. Donohue wrote about it in his book, calling it the unfair advantage. The 1970 Trans Am season is considered by most racing historians the high watermark of American production-based road racing. Every manufacturer fielded factory teams with top-tier talent. Parnelli Jones and George Fallmer in Bud Moore Boss Mustangs, Jim Hall and Vic Elford in Chaparral Camaros, Swede Savage in a Barracuda, Sam Posey in a Challenger. AMC finished second that first year, 3 wins, 3 seconds, 3/3 for Donohue. In '71, he won 7 of 9 races, 6 consecutive victories. AMC won the manufacturer's championship. George Fallmer drove the red, white, and blue Javelins to a second consecutive title in '72. AMC won again independently in '76. 3 Trans Am championships from the smallest car company in the country. The other manufacturers spent more through unofficial back channels than AMC spent through its entire official corporate racing budget. Penske then moved AMC into NASCAR with a Matador. Donohue won Penske's very first NASCAR race at Riverside in '73. Bobby Allison later campaigned the Matador to 3 victories and 10 top 5 finishes in just 19 starts during the '75 season. The car was competitive everywhere it showed up. The engines were strong, the people were talented, the results were real. But none of it changed the fundamental math. The emissions regulations of the early '70s hit the entire American auto industry. The Big Three each had dedicated emissions engineering departments with budgets in the tens of millions. AMC had to figure out compliance with a fraction of the resources. Compression ratios fell industry-wide, but watching the 401 drop from 10.2 to 1 to 8.25 to 1 felt like watching a fighter get his hands tied. The switch from gross to net horsepower ratings in '72 made every number look worse. 330 gross became 255 net. Some of that was measurement change, but real power was disappearing too, choked by exhaust gas recirculation, catalytic converters, and detuned ignition timing. By the late '70s, the 360 had fallen to as low as 125 horsepower. The 401 was discontinued entirely in '78. The era of AMC performance engines was over. The 1973 oil embargo was the knockout blow to AMC's performance ambitions. Years of scarce capital invested in muscle car credibility, racing programs, and high-performance image building were rendered worthless overnight when gas lines stretched around the block and consumers wanted nothing but fuel economy, which was exactly what AMC had been good at before they chased the horsepower wars. The company pivoted back: Gremlin, Pacer, Hornet derivatives, the Eagle. Each new model consumed development capital that AMC was running out of. Buying Jeep from Kaiser in 1970 was the move that kept AMC breathing for another 17 years. Jeep made money. Jeep had loyal buyers. Jeep didn't care about the pony car wars. But the passenger car division hemorrhaged cash relentlessly. By '78, AMC lost an estimated $65 million on non-Jeep products. Only Jeep profits kept the overall company in the black. Market share, which had exceeded 6% in the early '60s, collapsed to 1.2% by '78. Renault invested in '79, eventually acquiring controlling interest in the company. The Renault Alliance sold modestly at first, moving about 121,000 units in '83. But the cars didn't resonate with American buyers long-term, and quality problems eroded whatever goodwill the partnership generated. AMC built the Eagle, a pioneering four-wheel drive crossover that anticipated the modern SUV boom by 2 full decades. The Eagle combined sedan comfort with off-road capability in a way nobody else was offering. Brilliant product, wrong decade. Nearly 200,000 Eagles sold by '83, which proved the concept was sound. But proving a concept is cold comfort when you cannot afford to develop the next generation of anything. The Pacer had already wasted critical capital. The Matador Coupe disappointed. Every swing and miss burned resources AMC didn't have to spare. Meanwhile, Japanese imports were flooding into the small car market that AMC had pioneered, doing what AMC did, but with better quality control and newer designs. In '87, Chrysler's Lee Iacocca bought AMC for $1.5 billion. He wanted two things: the Jeep brand and the upcoming Grand Cherokee that AMC had been developing. He got both. The AMC name disappeared. Kenosha wound down. Passenger cars were gone immediately, but the engines outlived the company. Chrysler kept the AMC 360 in production for Jeep Grand Wagoneers until 1991. The AMC designed straight six-powered Jeeps all the way until 2006. Some AMC-designed door handles stayed on Wranglers until the 2007 complete redesign. Engineering from the 1960s still earning its keep 4 decades later. The aftermarket community never let the AMC V8 die. Today, 401 stroker kits push displacement to 408 cubic inches using a longer throw crankshaft. Edelbrock aluminum cylinder heads, like the Performer RPM series, can add 50 to 100 horsepower over the factory iron castings while shedding significant weight. Companies like Speedway Motors and Summit Racing stock a surprisingly deep catalog of AMC V8 performance parts. Modified 401s routinely produce 450 to 500 horsepower on the dynamometer. The block architecture always had more potential than AMC could extract on a factory budget with factory emissions constraints. The bones were good from the very start, and Jeep enthusiasts have kept the 360 alive as a preferred engine swap in older CJ models, prized for its low-end torque in rock-crawling applications. The engine that AMC built to sell Javelins ended up becoming a Jeep legend. Surviving AMC muscle cars are climbing in value. A mint-condition '68 AMX with a 390 and 4-speed manual commands serious money at auction. The Javelin outsold both the Plymouth Barracuda and Dodge Challenger in its day, a fact that surprises most people, though it's rarely mentioned in mainstream muscle car discussions. The AMC faithful have always known they were just outnumbered. That Donohue Penske Championship Javelin from '71 sold at auction for $847,000. More than any Parnelli Jones Mustang, more than any Donohue Camaro, more than any Sam Posey Challenger. The collector market finally priced what the stopwatch proved 50 years earlier. That car was special, and the people who knew always knew. AMC's V8 couldn't compete in the end. Not because it wasn't good enough. The engines won 3 Trans Am championships. They set records at Bonneville. They won NASCAR races against factory-backed competition. They powered cars, trucks, Jeeps, and marine applications for 35 years of continuous production. The engineering was never the problem. The money was the problem. Always was. When your competitor spends more on a single engine program than your company's entire annual revenue, talent and ingenuity will only carry you so far. AMC proved that a smaller company could design a better engine on a tighter budget than anyone believed possible. But they couldn't build enough of them, develop them fast enough, or market them loudly enough to keep the company alive. The independent that ran out of money long before it ran out of ideas. And there you have it, the AMC V8. If your old man had one in the driveway, or you've still got one tucked in the garage, tell me about it in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit subscribe. We do this every week.